You know what else we need to talk through? You may have heard, you may have been made aware that there's been a major Supreme Court news thing to happen. Abortion is under attack. And Matt Walsh says abortion is murder. Matt Walsh says abortion is murder. Now, I want you to understand, before we even do anything with Matt Walsh, as far as his trash bag opinion is concerned, that there are anti-abortion bills sort of like on the books in southern states, in red states around the country as this is getting struck down, that criminalizes further things beyond just like the third trimester abortion that they're phantom scared about, right? Things like ectopic pregnancy, things like any kind of abortion that would make sense. Like we always say, the rape or incest one obviously comes up. We want that to be protected, of course. But have you also heard them say, and many of these laws are starting to come into place, where things as simple as miscarriage are criminalized. I think Louisiana recently was the one that was starting to criminalize things like miscarriage. But wouldn't you know it, Matt Walsh on Twitter saying abortion is murder, by the way. Abortion's big time murder, okay? You got to go to prison if you have an abortion. Okay, that's Matt Walsh's stance. If your child dies due to neglect and you miscarry or something, this is the law, right? That is being pushed. If you miscarry, that can be considered a crime. You let your child die. Isn't this so fascinating? Would you be surprised to know that Matt Walsh tweeted himself that him and his wife have had miscarriages and mourned over them? You're delegitimizing the grief of miscarriages in order to justify slaughtering children. You're not only a babbling moron, but a soulless asshole on top of it. Interesting that miscarriages, so multiple of your children have died under your care, Matt Walsh. This is criminal negligence, and you should be put into prison immediately. You and your wife and your children should be taken from you. I am simply using your own standards, Matt Walsh. You deserve to be in the fucking gulag. Locked up. Throw away the key. Death penalty probably. Multiple children? I could understand one. Maybe life. Two? Are you a serial child killer? What an absolutely disgusting human being, not deserving of human rights. Take them away. In prison, forever. Anyway, he has lots to say about how abortion should be murder.
Let's begin by setting the stage. It is a bloody stage indeed. It is a stage that has seen the slaughter of 60 million human children since Roe v. Wade. 60 million. Why do some of us find this slaughter to be unthinkable and an injustice? Well, because every single one of those 60 million were innocent and defenseless human beings.
Oh, just like the innocent and defenseless human beings that died and wilted inside of your wife's unsuitable womb. Not strong enough to survive due to some deficiencies within you or your wife's DNA, the developmental issues within them, not viable enough for life. You and your wife didn't facilitate that and let those children who were humans and alive, you let them die. And you're disgusting for it. Wow.
And it is always wrong.
Takes a lot to admit that you are always wrong, allowing your child to die under your watchful eye. Wow.
Always wrong to directly and intentionally kill innocent and defenseless human beings. It's as simple as that. Our position is very straightforward. That's our whole position. I just summed it up. Are you killing an innocent, defenseless human being? Then it's wrong. That's it.
Okay. We should really stop doing military stuff. All of it, pretty much. No longer are you allowed to do any sort of strikes. If you're not allowed to kill innocent and defenseless people, you must allow healthcare to be a freedom. If you're making the call that innocent and defenseless humans should not die in a direct manner, you must, in fact, choose to house them if you force them to be alive. You must choose to give them healthcare. You must choose to not allow police officers to take the life of anybody without due process. I mean, there's lots of things that happen if you can't take the life of any innocent or defenseless person, if, of course, we're holding ourselves to that standard. Scott comment, thanks for the 50 biddies. Half of pregnancies end in spontaneous abortion. Ladies, looks like we're going to prison. What are you in for? I went to the hospital because I was bleeding out when my fetus fell out of my hoo-ha too early. That's true. I wonder how Matt Walsh would want I didn't know I was pregnant situations to be handled. Matt Walsh would want you to have the child if you didn't know you were pregnant, of course.
The pro-abortion person here will respond with a few different moves.
Okay.
The first is to try to dehumanize the unborn, of course. He'll claim that the unborn child is not a human person and thus does not have the same moral standing and cannot make the same moral claims for itself that a, quote, real person can make.
Kind of. I would make the statement that the parent that is birthing the child, the person that is responsible for the birth of the child, has more rights in this scenario, because you cannot force a person to do anything else for another person's like well-being if it has to violate their bodily autonomy. I cannot force Matt Walsh to give me one of his kidneys, or to let me use his body for blood, or for him to, I don't know, like human centipede and he eats my shit. He's attached to my asshole because that's where Matt Walsh's beautiful, juicy lips deserve to be. And he just eats my shit for sustenance. I can't make him do that, even if I medically need him to eat my shit for sustenance. These are things that I cannot force. And a collection of cells with the potential to be a human person is not, in fact, a person. That's why it's different. That's why we call them different things. Thanks for hanging out tonight.
Now, the idea that an unborn child isn't human,
or toin,
which is something that you do hear from pro-aborts, even supposedly educated ones, is such a silly, absurd, anti-scientific notion that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It's simply a scientific fact that the being in the womb is indeed a being, a living being, and it is a member of...
We don't care about living beings, though. What do you mean? We don't care about living beings. If you cared about living beings, you would make healthcare a human right. We simply do not care. None of the other stuff you do is like congruent with the take that living beings deserve life. They deserve it. How can you say that and also commodify healthcare? It isn't congruent with your other beliefs. So you have to demonstrate how that tracks across your politics. It is simply not reasonable. If you adjudicate this way and you set the standard that all people deserve the right to life, you cannot commodify anything required for life. And if that's what you'd like, if that's the deal you'd like to make, I will make that deal. Okay, no one can get an abortion until we change the law later. But you change it so that everyone has the right to life, and this includes shelter, healthcare, education. This includes all the things I need: food, water. Like, people will get fewer abortions just because the nature of wanting to have children and the fact that they were educated enough to prevent them in the first place. And then, of course, that society will eventually vote, of course, due to common sense and education, to undo that. I'll take that. I'll take the deal. Give that to me any day. It's barely a deal with the devil, because then it goes to states' rights, and so there's going to be some havens anyways. I'm willing to make that deal for a little bit. Plus, that allows everybody to have the enough mobility financially to move out of the shitty states anyway, to which they'll further sink because they won't have a workforce. It just whittles down their numbers over and over and lowers their power anyway. 100%. I would do that. It would seem maybe heartless at first, but 3 months would go by with those things in place, and everybody would get it would be like, oh, shit.
Of the human species. Now, we know that because all living things have to be a member of some species or another.
He's talking about science? Brother, you can't evoke science and also want creationism to be a thing and to enforce God into the topic. Like, what the fuck?
If an unborn child isn't human, then what species is it?
It's not about being a species. It's not a human. It's just developmentally not a human. It's an egg-chicken situation. Eggs are not chickens. That's it. Are you calling chickens and eggs the same thing? Because that's clearly not the thing. It just isn't what it is. It's not about it's barely about personhood. It's not about that. It's literally just like they are not the same. They're not the same thing. But I agree. I want fewer abortions. And if we look statistically at what causes that, it's access to healthcare and education. And the legality of abortions. But that's because both of those provide education and healthcare. However you want to cut it. You could say, okay, no more abortion clinics. Only abortions can be done at hospitals that like, you know, it has to be like a medical thing, not a, I don't know, you know, whatever they would say. No more abortion clinics. Cool. As long as you supply education and healthcare, it won't matter. It'll shake out the same.
Oftentimes what you'll hear is, oh, it's not a human, it's a fetus. Mm-hmm. Well, that's like saying it's not a human, it's a boomer.
Nope. That's like saying it's not a chicken, it's an egg. Because a human is just, a boomer is just an older human. You didn't go in the right direction, Matt. And you didn't do that on purpose because you know you're not smart enough. Because he couldn't say what I just said. He literally did apples and oranges. He didn't the metaphor is wrong. So if the metaphor is wrong, it makes him sound correct. Pretty easy to get around that, Matt. Next. Matt, do you want to come talk? Probably not. I can't imagine I have let's get Matt Walsh to talk pull. There's no way that coward would fucking do it. Hell no. Are you kidding me? Hell no. First off, it's the corn suit. But second off, he doesn't have the competence.
Okay, this is what maybe kind of works.
An unmoderated conversation, dude? No, only if he had fine-tuned control.
This is a stage of human development.
Yeah, a stage of human development in which it is not developed yet. Much like an egg.
Stage of human development means that it is a human.
Nope.
And we know that it's...
Like how we go... You know how we have slaughterhouses for eggs?
Of the human species because...
You know how when you make someone an egg, it tastes just like chicken?
As well, it has human DNA. And
some things have human DNA. We share a lot of DNA with bananas.
And other human characteristics, but also it was conceived by two human beings, which is a pretty good giveaway there. Two human beings have never in history conceived anything other than another human.
That's not true. Because, like, sometimes they conceive, like, cells that never turn into a human and don't develop that way. I mean, that literally happens. Turns out, that's not a human. It didn't develop correctly. Happens all the time. Regularly, like half the time.
Now, as for living, is it living? Well,
there's like fucking... There's just 25 people in here?
Only 3 states of being that a physical entity can be. And I think this holds true for the most part, except maybe at the quantum level.
Okay. About to be born, alive, and dead?
That would be most things are either alive, dead, or inanimate.
Inanimate.
Now,
What?
is the unborn baby inanimate?
I don't think that's accurate. Alive, dead, or inanimate? No, there's also sentience, sapience. Like algae is alive, but it isn't as alive as a human being. Again, he has no concept of this argument. He's not even close to good. He's just preaching to a choir of people that already agree with him. Like, this is not a good argument at all. It only works under very specific, like, circumstances and when you ignore other collections of things and ways that life exists. Fungus, jellyfish are not alive in the same way that we are, but we still consider them living. Viruses are clearly entities that exist and act in a certain way, but are not technically alive because of their way that they reproduce and respirate and stuff. Like, you wouldn't say a virus is inanimate. You would say a rock might be, but you wouldn't say coral is. But it's certainly not as alive as me. Like, what the fuck? This is just baby brain stuff. Really baby brain stuff.
No. Inanimate objects don't grow. They don't develop. They don't move on their own. They don't consume food.
Again, these are just bad because there's so many examples of things that are like fetuses, collections of cells. Like your skin still eats food, but you could, like, a collection of skin cells isn't murder. Even if it was my stem cell that could eventually turn into, something more. If you could clone me from skin cells, doesn't this literally mean that my skin cells must be protected?
This podium right here is inanimate. It will never be anything other than this.
What do you mean? It was a tree. The podium was a tree. And when it biodegrades, it will literally turn into other stuff. It's living things. I don't know, man. I don't know. He doesn't think about stuff on the right level.
Will decay and fall apart. You could cut it into pieces and build it into something else, but it's never on its own going to grow into something else.
That's not true. It literally will decay and turn into something else. And I know that you said that it's not the same thing, but it is. It is, and it was before. It was a tree. You wouldn't say that a podium is a tree, Matt. But you would be fine cutting down a tree, but you wouldn't be fine smashing this podium because you've now purchased it. Or whatever. Or they've purchased it. I assume you wouldn't be fine just smashing that right now because, it's a podium. Perfectly good podium.
It's inanimate. Is the unborn child dead? Well, no, we know it's not dead because if it was dead, then we wouldn't need the abortion. So that leaves only living.
Nope. It really doesn't. It is living to the extent that skin cells are alive, though. And it also does have the potential to become a human. And these are things that we understand, and is why we say that they're different things. And it's why we take abortion seriously. It's why I wouldn't want people using it as a prophylactic, and why people don't. Because they're not easy. Like, by the way, a Plan B pill is also an abortion. Like, in the way that they mean that would be outlawed. Just a Plan B pill. Just, I want to make sure nothing fertilizes and nothing sticks to me, and just I want to flush it out, get it good. Abortions can happen if the fetus is dead. It's in fact required. Yep, but if a baby dies inside of a womb, and these cases come up regularly. Sometimes babies die in your womb. You just miscarry. You have to abort the pregnancy to get it out. It is what it is. Sometimes you don't pass the fetus. And if you don't, then it dies inside you and decays inside you, and then you die. Condoms are way cheaper. I mean, condoms are cheaper, but they should be free. And not only that, it shouldn't be just condoms that we deal with. It should be the rest of it, the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay, so the baby is a living human. We've established that. We've settled that argument already.
We haven't. It's a bad argument. We haven't established that. It's not a living human. It isn't. I agree that it has the potential to be a human, but I also don't agree that the potential to be a human is of the same quality of life as in this case, I guess the mother, right? I'm not going to say the birthing person. Again, we have to choose our battles. The mother in this case.
That's good. What about person, though?
D&D is every Thursday, Oklahoma.
Well, this is a little bit more interesting
Every
because
Thursday.
the pro-abortion individual, if he has any degree of sophistication,
Well, I would, if we had any degree of sophistication, we'd still be back on step 1 and 2 because you hadn't actually done a good job of establishing that those are reasonable arguments, but that's fine.
will probably concede that a, quote, fetus, or undocumented infant, as I like to call them, he'll concede that it's a living human,
No,
but he'll say, okay, fine, it's a living human, you're right about that, but it's not a person.
it's not a living human or
And
a
he'll
person.
say that it's not a person because it's still developing and it is entirely dependent on its mother for survival, and this, he will say, means that it lacks moral standing.
No, I will say that its moral standing is superseded by the lives of the mother and, I'll even throw in a bone, the mother and the father. The heterosexual cisgendered couple that are white and delightsome. No, their rights supersede the rights of something that doesn't exist yet, right? It has the potential to exist, but it is still in a space where it doesn't have to exist. This guy's the most annoying figure on the right. I mean, he's just a piss brain. He actually isn't very smart at all. Every time we have content about Matt Walsh, it's underwhelming, and he just really hasn't thought. He's very confident, I guess, though. Not confident enough to have a discussion with anybody in an unmoderated space. But, it is what it is. Not a very bright guy. These are not the arguments that anyone would make. He's arguing against a straw man. Like, it's not even close.
But this view that personhood is acquired by degree and that it's forfeit if you are entirely dependent on someone else for survival clearly implicates more than just the unborn. It would seem that the sick, the infirm, the disabled, the elderly would all get caught up in this net.
No, because that's not the argument. If only the argument was steelmanned. It's simply about the rights superseding that of a being that cannot conceive of suffering and pain in the way that the others can. It's simply to the degree to which that thing experiences negative interactions with reality is just less. It doesn't have to experience pain or sorrow or anything, but the humans that already exist do. In the same way that sick or infirm people also, I don't really like that term, but he used it, the elderly as well. However, in the case of, let's say, the Terry Schiavo case is a great example. Someone who had no longer the cognitive ability to understand even who she was anymore. Her personhood had been taken away by illness and sickness. I think it was an accident. And her brain just didn't work anymore. If you're not familiar with it, it was a big to-do in the early 2000s. This lady in Florida basically became, I don't know what the term is, but brain dead. Her brain just didn't work anymore. It was fucked. She couldn't think anymore. Her frontal cortex wasn't working. She had barely any activity going on, and she was just literally, her organs were working, and it was keeping her alive, right? And it was a big thing. Her husband was like, she didn't want to be on this. She wants me to. She has always wanted me to undo the plug. She never wanted to be like this. She is like this. But her parents were religious and didn't want her to be killed, basically. And I understand from an emotional perspective why you wouldn't want to let your daughter go. But the husband had the right, and eventually they took her off life support. But it was a big thing. A vegetable, I get that's sort of insensitive, but whatever. Nonetheless, what I wanted to highlight was, it seems pretty clear that that person has about the same amount of ability to experience pain and suffering as a fetus. About the same. In fact, I would say a fetus has even more. So my threshold, more for the fetus, really. And I would say that it's only more that, like depending on the stage of development, right? But she was literally her brain had died. And this is how I view this as well. The only pain and suffering that can be experienced are by the people that are alive and able to experience it. It's about cognition. It's not simply about existence or aliveness or any of that. It's about the ability to experience these things. Right? And once they can experience it, and he'll say something like, oh, but what about someone that's incredibly mentally challenged? Can an incredibly mentally challenged person experience pain and sorrow and happiness and sadness, even if it's to a minimal degree? Then yes, it has more rights. This person has more rights than the fetus, because of course. Now, if they're just hooked up to a machine and kept their heart beating, I don't think that's a quality of life. I think that's harmful for the people around them that love them. I think that's harmful for the society in general, the people, the workers that have to deal with that and have to see this person just not exist. I think that can be traumatic. I think it's a drain on the system for everybody because it's resources being propped up to literally keep flesh alive for no reason other than some sort of archaic sentimentality in a religious sense. And in the same way with fetuses, like, two people made life. Right? I don't imagine anybody who seeks an abortion does so incredibly lightly. And if they do so, usually there's exigent circumstances like drug problems or something. Like even Sarah and I, who would get an abortion 100%, it wouldn't be lightly. It wouldn't be like we might joke about it and be like, oh, scoop it out. But it would be like, I'd be worried about Sarah. I would be worried about her health. I would be worried about, like, you know, in a different circumstance, I'd probably be worried about how to pay for it. Even though I'd still be worried about how to pay for it because she might need other stuff. But, you know, I just worry like that. But, like, I would worry about her well-being. I would worry that, like the social impact of her having to, because I think she would very proudly be like, I got an abortion, and people having, you know, they definitely would have their stupid Matt Walsh reactions. Like, I would be worried about other stuff. It wouldn't be taken lightly, but it's definitely a decision that would be made. And it's simply because we're not in a situation where we want to raise a child. And isn't that a good enough reason to not force someone to raise a child? Wouldn't you simply want, as an American, as a patriot, as a human, want children to be born into households that want them? It doesn't seem like a very big ask, in my opinion. And now you could say, well, put that child up for adoption. You haven't demonstrated to me that you're willing to adopt enough babies to warrant that as an excuse. How many kids are up for adoption? How many kids up for adoption in the U.S.? How many? It's a lot. Too many. How many children await adoption in the United States? Of the 400,000 children in foster care, approximately 117,000 are waiting to be adopted. That's just too many. That's too big of a percentage of the people that live here to have to go through that. And everybody who, and by the way, these are the same people, Matt Walsh, that say like, oh, grooming is bad, child predation is bad, pedophilia is bad, all things we agree on. Then why would you advocate in your anti-abortion argument, why would you advocate to prop up the institution most, I would say the American institution most commonly associated with all three of those things, pedophilia, grooming, child predation, and more, child abuse. It's that system. It's the adoption system, the foster care system. It's literally toxic to, I don't know anyone who's had a good experience in the foster care system. Not one. From top to bottom, 100% this was a good thing. And not because their parents are dead or didn't want them or whatever, or they were orphans at all. Literally just their experience, isolated away from that. They might have trauma from not having stuff like I don't know, like a normal family, like Matt Walsh might say, right? But nonetheless, the foster care system could be a good one. The adoption system could be good, but they're not. So why would you prop such a system up? Seems strange.
If we're not willing to do that, if we're not willing to look at an infant child at, let's say, 3 months out of the womb, or an elderly person in a nursing home, or a disabled person in a wheelchair.
3 months on.
If we're not willing to look at them and say that, well, you're kind of not as much of a person as me. You're a little bit less people-y than me.
Oh, he's still making the straw man argument. Not an argument that any of us make. Not the argument any of us make. Just to reiterate.
If we're not willing to do that, if we're not willing to say that personhood is attained by degree contingent upon factors like self-sufficiency, then we are left with this idea that personhood is inherent, and all of its attending moral rights and dignities are inherent.
If you say that all inherent dignities and moral rights should be given to all humans, then why are you commodifying housing, healthcare, education, etc.? Food, water. You can't do both. You literally cannot make these arguments. It delegitimizes every other aspect of your policy. This should be taken into account when reading these messages. This is how our law should work. That is not congruent with your other standpoints. That's it.
Inherent means existing in something as a permanent, essential, and characteristic attribute of that thing. If something is inherent, that means that it belongs to the essential nature of that thing.
Okay.
The idea that our human dignity, our human rights are inherent, our personhood is inherent.
You can't be anti-trans then. Human rights are inherent, personhood's inherent, dignity is inherent, safety is inherent, life is inherent. If all of these things are inherent rights that should not be violated, then America as we know it should not exist in the way it does. And I agree, Matt. I agree these things are inherent. Simply let me make the yes and argument to you. Yes, and this affects other policies, Matt, if this is what your argument is. And I'm fine with that. You're still wrong about abortion, but I agree with this.
This is an idea that lies very much at the foundation of our country. In fact, any notion of human rights depends on this idea. But, and this is just a logical conclusion, if an unborn...
That's not a logical conclusion if you don't make the right arguments. If you simply argue with the straw man of the position, you can't make a logical conclusion to this. You have to talk to somebody that disagrees with you, Matt. Don't assume what they're saying. The only way he can have this discussion is if he doesn't have anybody else tell him why he's wrong.
Unborn baby does not have inherent value, then human value itself is not permanent or essential, and thus if an unborn baby does not have inherent value, then neither does anybody in this room.
Okay, that's how you already treat it. That's literally how you already treat it, Matt. It's not the argument I'm making. I do think that there is value in a fetus. Shocker. There's value in it, chat. I believe a fetus has value. Not enough not to abort it. If you'd like to. I say like to, but if you need to. If you choose to. But it has some value. It's a sliding scale. It's not an all or nothing thing.
That's the thing about inherent value. You cannot gain it.
Yes, you can.
That's why it's inherent.
It's not
you
inherent,
either
though.
have it or you don't. It's a very simple formula. This is how I try to explain it to people who are confused.
Sure.
Take yourself in your current form.
Mm-hmm.
Now, think about yourself. Okay, right now you have inherent value, inherent worth. You're a person. Great. Now rewind back to yesterday.
Okay.
Were you a person back then?
Yep.
Did you have inherent value back then?
Mm-hmm. Now rewind back to where I was a fucking fetus.
Yes. Okay, now rewind back
Do it.
10 years ago.
Okay.
Still a person, still have inherent value.
Not if I'm 9 years old.
Now go back to your first birthday.
Okay. Yep.
Were you a person back then?
Still not. He's not making an argument against anything that we're talking about. He's like, we're still on the same page. People exist. Okay.
You had inherent value. You had human rights.
Okay.
All that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. What about in the womb, the day before birth? I bet you is that what he's going to say? Day before birth.
Now go back to the moment that you emerged from your mother's birth canal.
Okay.
Was that you? Did you have inherent value?
Yes.
Okay.
But less. Babies have less. However, emotionally, they have more. Isn't that cool? A lot of people like babies.
Now rewind the clock back just 10 more seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Just 10 more seconds.
10 more of them.
What happened in those 10 seconds?
You came out of the canal. No one's arguing this. This is just a made-up argument. We're not saying anything like this. Like it doesn't matter. 7 months too. 8 months. Whatever. One of my friends growing up was like a 7th month preemie. He's alive. He's a nurse. I think he might be a Republican. But I'm fine with him existing. I have no problem with this. I don't know. I'm not trying. No one's saying that perfectly good babies are being aborted at the end of the third trimester, 10 minutes before this. This doesn't happen. Again, they're just doing fringe cases. These are not These are not the scenarios that happen. The only time that kind of stuff happens is when tragedy strikes the fetus or the mother or both. These are the only times. 9 in 10 abortions happens in the first 12 weeks when they're not even human people. Definitely not even close. 90% of abortions, absolutely. The other 1 out of 10, the other 10% of abortions are almost always due to complication. That's it. Honestly, most doctors would just have you give birth even if the baby is dead. It happens. It happens. They argue against nobody. Nobody is arguing on behalf of like willy-nilly late-term abortions. Not one person. Everybody agrees. There should be no restrictions on it, because anytime you start putting a restriction on it, say, okay, it can't be done in the last, if it's 8 months, cool, but 8 months in 1 day, not cool anymore. Have no idea what could happen on 8 months in 1 day. You literally can't, you just can't put a restriction on it. Because people aren't going to be doing, like, no one wants to just be pregnant for 8.5 months and then be like, nah, never mind, take it out. It's like most doctors would be like, okay, it's going to be alive when we take it out, though. They're not just going to kill your baby. Like, there's not doctors that are like, okay, let me inject this perfectly good fetus that will be a baby in 2 days. Let me inject it with fucking formaldehyde and just preserve it in your womb, and then we'll take it out. Like, let me just rip its head off. These aren't happening. You're not going to get people to agree to that. These aren't scenarios that we need to worry about. Can we conceive of them? Sure. Is there an epidemic of this happening? No. If there was, we can... How about this? If people start doing that, I'll be on your side, Matt. Tell you what. If people start... This is the bet I will make with conservative America and Matt Walsh. Okay? How about this? If people start getting purely prophylactic abortions in the 8th or 9th month of pregnancy at a rate higher than 1 in 1,000 abortions, 1 in 10,000 abortions, you can have no abortions ever again. We'll just undo them. No one gets to have abortions anymore. I promise you that abortion will be fine forever. Forever. No one will get 8-month prophylactic abortions. It's not happening. They're not things. There will always be circumstances that make that happen that are reasonable. Always. It'll almost always be medical problems as well. I don't think most men realize how fucking miserable pregnancy is that they think they would intentionally prolong it for our abortions. I know, right? Like, oh, I gotta let this fetus get big and tasty first. I gotta let it develop because it will have more meat for the winter. That is not how it goes.
All that happened is you change locations. That's it. It's still you. My point here is that there is an unbroken chain of you-ness connecting the you of right now to the you that came into being at the moment of conception. Uh-huh. And so whatever I can say is inherent in you now, I must logically say was inherent in you then. That is why an unborn child is a human person, and that is why killing the human person who is innocent and defenseless is by definition murder.
Okay, he's not even arguing with us anymore. I think this is the end of the video. There's really no reason to talk any further. He's not arguing with us, and then he just talks about how he's Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire. So that's the end of the Matt Walsh video. Matt Walsh doesn't even understand the conversation that we're having, and he doesn't understand what the point of view is from pro-abortion people.